The year is 2020, the month is April, and the world is suffering day after day from the greatest pandemic in its recent history. Shut inside my house, I start watching the new spring season, and between the emotional dab of Fruit Basket Season 2 and the cool jazzy energy of Great Pretender, it was Tower of God that challenged my expectations in the most unexpected ways. Tower of God Season 1 pulled me into its mysterious universe where each floor of its almost infinite tower functioned as a self-contained world, ruled by the oppressive 10 great families and their enigmatic king. While the mystery of what lies inside and outside the tower keeps you hooked, it's the cast, from Coon's charming intellect to Rax's explosive energy and even Rachel's fascinating yet repulsive nature that brings the tower's intricate web to life. However, after reading the webcomic, I began to see some of the major criticism of Season 1, like the shift in Kong's character, the vague explanation of Shinzu and its various power systems, and even the changes in Ben and Endorshi relationship. Yet why? Knowing all of that, does my appreciation for Season 1 remain the same? And I know, no, in fact, I always knew that the show wasn't perfect, but something about it always felt different. Walking alongside its fascinating story, I found something more, something unique that makes Season 1 special. And that's exactly why Season 2 promised so much. To see how they handle its next chapter, introducing a whole new cast of characters, expanding its complex world, all while preserving the essence that made the first season so unique. And the time finally arrived. The OG Season 2 aired, but then it hit me something I wasn't prepared for. A feeling, a strange, unexpected feeling I didn't even know this show could bring upon me. And no, it wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. Certainly it wasn't happiness. This feeling lingered. It grew. Until eventually it crystallized into a single, all-consuming question. Where the hell is Tower of God Spark? And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about in this video. First, we will dissect the elements that made Season 1 so special, then we will examine how Season 2 lost its spark and why it failed to capture the same magic as its predecessor. So that being said, the question now is, what made Tower of God Season 1 so special? If you talk to a reader of the Tower of God webcomic about the anime, one major complaint always shows up. The first season didn't just follow the webtoon. It changed things up in a way that made the anime feel like a different story altogether. The plot took some unexpected turns and the world building was tweaked to give a more mysterious vibe. Instead of focusing heavily on the mechanics of the tower, which are the basis for comprehending this world, the anime chose to spotlight the relationship between Rachel and Ben, making their dynamic the emotional core of the season. Besides that, the characters had their arcs simplified, losing some of their depth like Endorsi, Haw, and Leroro. So despite all of those changes, how did the first season manage to have this spark? Well, it's safe to say it boils down to two things. Two big things. The first one, its soundtrack. Now let me tell you a story. Not so long ago, a friend of mine was watching Season 1 for the first time. He turned to me mid-episode and said, "Dude, the show is kinda carried by its OST, don't you think?" At that moment, I froze. Did he know what he just did? Did he realize the absolute storm of opinions, analysis, and borderline obsessive admiration he just triggered? He might have thought twice, cause let me tell you, I can talk about this soundtrack for hours. And no, I'm not exaggerating, I already have, and you know what? I'll probably do it again. And it's all thanks to one man, Kevin Penkin. I can absolutely guarantee to you all that he didn't just score Tower of God, he saw it. He understood what makes this series so vast and unique, and he brought that same uniqueness to life throughout his music. If in POG each floor introduces a new setting, new challenges, and new characters, Panking's music shifts alongside these changes, seamlessly blending the swiping grandeur of orchestral strings with pulsating electronic beats, and intricate touches like the delicate plucking of traditional Korean gayajeon or the rhythmic echoes of Middle Eastern percussion. These elements combine to give each floor its own distinct identity, whether it's the ominous echoing tension of the trials or the serene yet unsettling calm between battles. But Panking's brilliance doesn't stop there. If each character in the tower is wildly different, with unique motivations, backstories, and abilities, then Kevin gives each of them a musical identity that fits them perfectly. From Ban's soft, curious, but intense theme to Khan's clever and strategic motifs that echo his cunning nature, and Rex's powerful beastly rhythm that embody his strength. Or even my personal favorite, Rachel's theme, which perfectly captures the complexity of her duality. By having such a good comprehension of these characters and places, Kevin's score managed to elevate everything. The animation, the pacing, the emotional weight of every scene, transforming them into something greater, something alive. Every note, every rhythm fills the tower with a richness, a texture that makes it feel distinct, that makes it feel special. And as a matter of fact, here is where I always thought Season 1 lived. For years and years I have listened to this soundtrack and talked about it as my main reason for appreciating this show so much. And with the arrival of Season 2 and with the certainty that Kevin Panking would still be involved, I was totally okay with the changes that came with it regarding the studio. However, even with Season 2 adapting the events from the comic more faithfully than ever, even with Kevin Panking's soundtrack still doing its magic, why does it still feel so strange? And then I remembered the second reason that made Season 1 special. Far less praise than its soundtrack, often treated like a footnote, if even mentioned at all. But here's the thing, that's exactly what the second season was missing. If the soundtrack worked as the stars at the top of the tower, then the animation was the dark sky, giving it space for it to shine. You don't need a degree in animation, a decade of industry experience, or even a single drawing lesson to see it. The animation has changed dramatically. That is, unless you're one particular guy, but we'll get to him, bear with me. To talk about Season 1's animation, it's important to consider again the blocks this story is built upon. As previously mentioned, our setting is an almost infinite realistic tower where each floor and each character feel and look like they've just stepped out of an entirely different tale. Yet somehow the work makes this wild mixture feel seamless, natural, and coherent. And if the anime's OST helps to do that, the first season's animation also does justice to precisely capturing this feeling. What allows me to confidently say that the animation was really good, but not in the way most people address as quote-unquote big animation. Nowadays, when people talk about great animation, two examples always come up: the fluid, intense action sequences of Jujutsu Kaisen or the stunning visuals of Kimetsu no Yaiba, aka Demon Slayer. These are perfect examples of what we typically consider good animation. And for sake of God, I'm not saying otherwise. These shows are visually jaw-dropping. You can practically see the money from their massive budgets pouring out of the screen. But there is another, far less praised style of animation that I find equally impressive. It's the kind of show that, upon seeing it, makes you immediately think, I've never seen anything like this before. Shows with visuals so unique that they encapsulate the exact feeling of that specific story perfectly. Not necessarily because the animation is flawless, but because it's distinct and stand out among all the other examples in this medium. Examples that come to mind are the animation of Shinsei Kayori that perfectly matches matches its deep, complex world, the original Kinu no Tabi and its beautiful yet terrifying visuals, the otherworldly texture in Gankutsuo, or the raw, unconventional yet deeply emotional art style of Ping Pong the Animation. Making smart decisions in composition, coloring, visual effects, and shadowing are just as amazing, if not more so, than the high-budget animation we often praise. Why? Because it's far more challenging to achieve something extraordinary when you don't have a limitless budget at your disposal. Oftentimes, as history have shown, limitation can force creativity, which can result, not so rarely, in something special. At the end of the day, whether it's an artistic choice or due to limited budget, doesn't matter. The result of giving a distinctive feeling to the viewer that lasts long after the show ends is achieved regardless. This elevates the show that, under other circumstances, we might call good or even great to a whole new level. I could talk about many scenes in TOG Season 1 to exemplify that, like the pure chaos in the Crown Game, the suffocating tension of Episode 12, or Episode's one-shot, where Ben stands before the tower's massive gates. But let's talk about my personal favorite, the door test. In the 12-door test, we are given a masterclass in adaptation and in the true potential that lies within Season 1. Such a level is achieved throughout the clever use of two elements. First, how he chooses to adapt the events from the manga, and second, how its animation plays into these adaptations. So, let's break this down. The episode begins with fragment glimpse of Kun's backstory, presented in a visually fascinating, almost novel-like manner. Nothing is entirely clear at first, but we piece together that Kun was betrayed, abandoned, and ultimately exiled from the Agero family. And the most important detail, we learn that a girl named Maria was chosen as the house successor over him. While the manga takes an interesting approach to this scene, using the verticality of its format to guide the eye and leave the interpretation to our imagination, the anime chooses to dive deeper into the visual languages of Kun's memories, emphasizing the broken, fragile nature of his past. Here, the backgrounds are washed out, colors are muted, and the lines become hazy when Maria appears. The intention is clear. The show isn't aiming for literal clarity, it's portraying Kun's subjective memories throughout stunning composition and color work. This isn't just backstory, it's trauma bleeding into perception, a warped emotional flashback told entirely throughout texture. And speaking of texture, Season 1's uniqueness becomes even clearer in the contrast between this scene and the next. We jump to the present, where our trio of protagonists and all of the other regulars wait for the next try on the first area of the tower. Here we get time to explore their dynamic, learn more fragments about the world, and most importantly, dive deeper into Kun's character. But after the subjectivity and emotional way of Kun's flashback, this new scene works as a well-crafted breather. Not just thematically, but for the purpose of this video, to highlight the animation's greatest strengths. And it all comes down to its unconventional line work and distinct coloring. Unlike most modern animes which favor crisp, consistent outlines, Tower of God opts for irregular, sketch-like contours that shift in the thickness from frame to frame. Characters often feel hand-drawn, slightly unstable, giving the animation a raw, expressive quality. You can clearly see that in the eyes of Bang and Kam, or in the shadows and outlines of the characters' bodies. The coloring too is anything but conventional. Instead of aiming for glossy realism or polished saturation like most seasonal anime, Tower of God goes for a more muted palette that feels more like watercolor or ink wash than digital cel shading. Color shifts subtly from scene to scene, bending with mood and theme rather than staying consistent. This isn't just color grading, it's expressive design. And in those imbalanced hues, it finds something far more valuable: atmosphere. The combination of these two elements, the line work and the color, elevates the animation's uniqueness to another level. And together with its direction, it portrays the uniqueness of its narrative throughout distinct visuals, which is stunningly demonstrated when our three protagonists arrive at the 12-door testing room. Even though the construction of this scene remained the same as in the manga, they have 12 doors, must pick the correct one, have no apparent clues, and their actions follows the same beats. The coloring and the line art give the room and the scene a much more cohesive and eerie atmosphere. The pale, uneasy palette and unstable contours make the space feel off balance, as if the room instead is under pressure. And as Khan stands surrounded by uncertainty, the visual pulls us into his mind, portraying the biggest change from the manhwa. And once again, the anime elevates the moment by materializing his inner conflict. The manhwa's composition is already clever, using a vertical layout to stack Khan, the doors, the clock, the dialogue, and the fragments of his trauma all in one panel. But the anime turns this into something even more impactful. In the anime, as he analyzes the puzzle, red doors float around him like data. A massive clock ticks in the background, not just as timer, but as a metaphor for pressure. His anxiety becomes visible, almost tactile. But the anime also captures how Khan's memories influence his reasoning. While the manhwa reuses a few familiar panels, the anime makes those memories feel real. They are ghosts. Maria isn't just mentioned, she's present, physically there. And by doing this, the anime let us clearly see inside his heart, let us understand Khan even more than the scene in the manhwa managed to. So while the manhwa offers interesting visual ideas, it tends to tell us more than it shows. That's not necessarily bad, show don't tell isn't a strict rule, but the anime managed to elevate and give more depth to this scene by materializing emotion. It understands how to make things resonate throughout motion, color, line, and direction. And in doing so, it doesn't just retell a story, it creates something that lives in our imagination and lingers in our memories. And by concluding this scene, that's exactly where the first season of Tower of God excels. There's a texture, a visual uniqueness here that I cannot find anywhere else in anime. It's not perfect, but it stands out in a sea of anime that honestly look the same. And for TOG's unique story, this animation style seemed oddly perfect. So after the first season aired, I was hyped to see how the production would evolve over time. One of the greatest pleasures of reading a manga lies in seeing the evolution of the author during the process. And the same can be said for long-running anime productions, like seeing Eiichiro Oda refine his style throughout One Piece, Jun Mochizuki in Pandora Hearts, or god, even the perfect Kentaro Miura's art in Berserk. The same applies to any artist in any field, and TOG is such a good example of that. If you read the comic, you know how ugly, I'm not gonna say that, how less polished the art of Seal was in the comic's first season. But watching Seal's style grow and blossom over the years was incredible. So naturally, I was excited to see how the anime's production would evolve with such a unique artistic approach in future seasons. And then, the animation studio changed. At first, like I stated previously, I was optimistic. I thought this new studio might bring a fresh take to the story's next arc, while respecting the elements established in the first season. But I'd be lying if I said Tower of God Season 2's animation is as good or even as interesting as Season 1's. If the first season was fascinating and distinctive, the second season took TOG's rich source material and slapped on unremarkable animation. If they had just gone with regular season animation, I might have been okay with it. But no. This animation is not just generic. At times, it's far below average. Bad. That's what I'm trying to say. It's bad. For God's sake, in Season 2, Episode 5, when Khan talks to Rachel, look at how the door opens and closes. It literally opens and closes by itself. A better example of Season 2 peak animation comes in the Season 1 flashbacks, where we can clearly see how Season 1 charm became lifeless. From its coloring to the character's movements, every single aspect lacks emotion. And this all reminded me of a discussion I recently saw online on the animation of TOG Season 1 versus TOG Season 2. One person reasonably pointed out that they missed the unique style of the first season because it had a distinct, less generic feel. What I'm basically saying in this video. And the guy in the discussion had only seen the trailer. Just the trailer. But then there was this other guy. And I'm not kidding, he said. The second season animation looks exactly the same. And that's not all, he continued, and I quote, "Actually, it's objectively better than the first season. It's a natural evolution. Dude, stop complaining over nothing." I started by saying you don't need to be a genius to spot the difference between the two seasons. But calling it a natural evolution? Dude, what? When we talk about evolution in art, like what I mentioned earlier, it's about comparing an artistic's grow over time, or the evolution of a studio style. But if you change the studio and the new one doesn't even attempt to carry over the original's visual approach, or the approach in general that the series had previously, we're not talking about evolution. We're talking about something entirely different. A good comparison is when Haikyuu changed studios after its second season, or Shingeki no Kyojin aka Attack on Titan after its third season. In both cases, the changes weren't nearly as dramatic as what happened with DOG. People might have their preference, but I believe it's way harder to look at one of those changes and simply say the studio change was a natural evolution over the previous one. When we talk about improvement plus changing the studio, my dude, it's like comparing Studio Dean's Fate Stay Night to Fotable's Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works. Or within the same studio comparing Fate Zero to Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works and Fate Stay Night Heaven Feels. That's improvement. So if you cannot spot the uniqueness of Tower of God Season 1, compare it to Tower of God Season 2, I'm seriously concerned about your vision. A doctor's appointment would really suit you well. So if you're one of those who actually think the animation in Tower of God Season 2 is a natural evolution from Season 1, I'm sorry, but you're missing the point. The real beauty of Season 1 wasn't about flashy actions or a polished look. It was about being different, about taking creative risk with its art direction that perfectly matched the world of Tower of God. That's what made it stand out. Season 2, however, feels like it lost that spark, trading a unique artistic approach for something that, at best, feels generic, and at worst, lazy. But here's the problem. It's not just about the visuals, it's the storytelling, the atmosphere, and the heart that Season 2 struggles to capture. And that's why this shift in animation isn't just a technical downgrade, it's a loss of what made Tower of God so visually captivating in the first place. After Season 1, Tower of God deserved more. And now with Season 2, it still deserves more. Season 1 brought a unique storytelling approach with its incredible world and Kevin Panking's unforgettable OST, but it lacked certain elements to push it into greatness. On the flip side, Season 2 filled in those gaps, yet it diverged from the magic that made the first season so special. Many fans believe that a perfect adaptation is the one that mirrors the source material panel by panel, word by word, but that's where we miss out. Season 1 took creative liberties that gave Tower of God its distinct flavor, elevating it beyond a mere translation of the manhwa, understanding that it's better to adapt to match the original material intention than to die in a new media being lost in translation. However, in Season 2, those bold choices start to fade, leaving something crucial behind. While the second season continues to offer solid storytelling, it struggles to capture that intangible spark that made the first season stand out. So, if I'm trying to make a point here, is that while Tower of God Season 1 was missing something to achieve greatness, Tower of God Season 2 is missing something to be special. So, if you got to the end of this video, thank you so much, and you can comment your opinions, give a like or a dislike, I don't know, and subscribe, because I made videos here in this platform. Thank you so much. See you on the next one.